All right, we are live. Good day, my crypto friends. It's a pleasure to see you today. We are going to talk about what is universal resource inheritance, Dan's new big idea. We have Rob from EOS Detroit. We have Andrew, an EOS community member, and me, Happy Money Man from the EOS Podcast. So let's just dig right into it. Rob, go ahead and get us started with a explanation of what is URI and big picture.
So URI seems to be the new non-polarized term for UBI, but that stands for Universal Resource Inheritance. And it would seem to me that a good way to think about it is a peace treaty between past and future generations, where wealth is being continuously renegotiated over time instead of just laid claim to whoever was first. And it provides a baseline amount of value that gives people opportunities. So to me, it's really important because the one way I think we could really change the world with this technology is by showing the rest of the world it's a big opportunity for them. And so what not a better way than to create a magic money button. They can come sign up, they can get into the EOS ecosystem, they can get their free account or pay a small fee for one, and they can start to claim, they can press the magic money button once in a while and use it to do something they need to do. And need to do, that's subjective, but I'd say, it gives people a chance in a sense. Like if you're really at the margins of poverty and you get a little extra cash every week, that's totally going to change your life and maybe allow you to, sort of work your way out of that situation too. So to me, it's all about increasing opportunity.
Yeah, good take. Andrew, what do you think? What's your kind of explanation of URI here?
I think Rob did a pretty good job of explaining sort of the fundamental ideas behind it. One caveat is that it's sort of how it's been talked about being implemented is not necessarily as basic. Everyone gets one EOS per day or whatever. It's more kind of mathematical than that, kind of around the idea that we have this worker proposal inflation system. And the way I see it is I'm personally not a big fan of the worker proposal system because I think it represents a big potential area of abuse. There's no sort of negative disincentive for bad behavior there. So the way I see it, it's sort of redirecting that to something that's going to bring a lot more value into the ecosystem by onboarding a lot of new users. And so while it is definitely going to help a lot of people, especially those who are sort of less well off, for token holders, really, the benefit is that you're increasing the user base of EOS hugely. You're just bringing a bunch of new people into the system, and that's pretty valuable. I mean, if you look at a currency like Stellar, they got the Stellar Lumens, and most of those they've just given out, either airdropped to Bitcoin holders or a lot of their tokens they just gave away through Facebook. They used Facebook essentially as their identity verification, and then attempted to, divvy up their own UBI basic thing on it. But if you look at Stellar, I think only like around 20% of their tokens have been distributed, and it's like super centralized, but they're the number 6 cryptocurrency, it's right behind EOS. And one of the big reasons for that is because they've onboarded all of these new users who are now part of the ecosystem. And
yeah, that Stellar faucet was great. I just forgot that I had it for like 3 or 4 years and remembered last year. That's like, holy crap, I got $5,000 in US dollar terms for signing up for this website in 2014.
Wow.
And of course, I dumped it all into EOS.
Represent.
Beautiful. Yeah, I think the point that both of you made is the opportunity for onboarding new users into EOS is dramatic. And so the trade-off that people are worried about, the 5% inflation, could be almost a moot point, because it could onboard so many users that the trade-off, it outpaces that any inflation, and that inflation's already been baked into the model. So what I'd like to do to kind of little description of URI is just take a couple quotes from Dan, because so he puts a fundamental question is, how do we allocate the natural resources of the universe fairly across all generations? And then each day is kind of a new day, and each person derives a piece of the unearned natural resources of the universe. So it's not how much wealth is needed, but how much wealth is available to pass on to the next generation. And so that's kind of for me, one of the fundamental differences between UBI and what we're talking about now, URI, is that it's not we need to help the needy. There is a set of resources that comes naturally from the earth or from the EOS ecosystem, and each day those resources can be distributed evenly, because no one has necessarily earned those resources. So that's the take, which is a little different than how much do we need to make everyone not poor. That's the UBI approach, which is much different. So I'll just do a quick little read here. The point of the process isn't to demonstrate that using a process derived from first principles, we can derive a basic income that is the same ballpark as what's proposed. Furthermore, we can do so by not asking how much money is needed, but by how much we're available to pass on to the next generation. So here's the numbers. Basically, a wealth tax of 5% a year gives everyone income above the poverty level without violating fairly negotiated property rights of any generation. So this brings the number for us in the U.S. to about $300,000. If you have $300,000 of value, then that's your break-even point. That means about 75% of Americans would pay no wealth tax. And then if you were above this $300,000, then you're probably going to be able to grow your wealth by more than 5%. So that 5% is going to be negligible to you. So that's the basic theory behind what Dan's proposing with EOS, is this 5% wealth tax that you will, or through inflation, that if you're holding a lot of EOS, you'll probably find a way to outpace that. And if we're onboarding people, we'll probably find a way to outpace that 5% inflation. So that's kind of briefly the numbers. Rob, do you have anything to add to those numbers or make those a little bit more clear about what this actually means for the EOS ecosystem?
Yeah, just kind of piggybacking off what you said. We already are seeing ways that we'll be able to make EOS tokens productive, whether that's the Rex proposal or Chintai, which is supposed to launch this week, to leasing markets that allow us token holders to make passive income. So that alone may be able to offset, or at least somewhat offset inflation that's being distributed to everybody. And yeah, the reframing that you mentioned from what do we have to distribute around versus what do we need is, I think, huge. Because Dan had mentioned, if the entire society becomes unproductive, eventually there will be a point where people do just need to go out and produce something. So if the result of URI is laziness everywhere, which I don't think would be the case personally, then eventually the URI will just devalue, and then it won't be able to sustain life, and people will have to go do stuff anyway. So it kind of self-balances over time if society were to adapt in a way where they're less productive. But I honestly think unleashing something like URI will allow more people in society to be more productive, because they'll have that little edge they need to make something happen, or make their dreams happen, or start their business, or whatever it may be, like work a few less hours so they can think a little longer, you know, and not be totally spent. I mean, I don't know exactly how it'll play out because it'll be different across the board, and you can't generalize that. But in general, I could see, you know, not only the user acquisition part making EOS more valuable, but the fact that this is a great way to create a whole bunch of believers in the system. Like if you positively change someone's life, they're going to be a believer. That's what happened with me and Steem. I mean, you know, I was around since BitShares, so I was there before Steem, but going into Steem, like, or seeing Steem launch really got me back in because I realized, wow, this is a real opportunity for me to do something I need to do, which is pay off some debt. And so, you know, once you really gain value from these new systems, then you're just going to be a solid believer. And so URI, it's going to acquire users that will truly believe in the transformative power of this technology. And they're going to want to go out and find new ways to build value with it, possibly. And so it's a great, to me, it seems like a great positive feedback loop where it's just going to continually build and grow. And it's almost like perpetual motion to some extent. But that's what positive feedback loops seem like. But, you know, there are the conditions that will trigger, you know, the feedback loop to stop. Like if everyone were to stop doing productive things and not build wealth. So, yeah, I guess that's all I have to add. In general, though, you've covered it.
Andrew?
I'd like to add a caveat. I think there's been some amount of confusion in terms of, Dan Larimer has a vision for, you know, what he wants to see in the world, period, which includes the 5% wealth tax and all this other stuff, essentially because if you have 5% inflation in EOS and then nothing else, then people are going to tend to move their money to these basically real estate in the stock market, things that do not have the 5% wealth tax to them. But that sort of 5% wealth tax is separate from the EOS issue. I don't think I've heard anybody actually suggesting that EOS implements a tax on wealth. But in effect,
that's what inflation works out to be, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Only it's more palatable.
Yeah,
it's devaluing everyone token for token equally over time. And to me, that's way more palatable. Like I'm happy to take on, you know, we are all happy to take on some level of dilution because we are all interested in EOS, even though it has inflation. So then the question comes down to how do we use the inflation? And I tend to agree with you that creating a war chest out of the worker proposal system creates a target. And depending on the distribution of stake, that could be looted by whales potentially.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's not to say, I think that it would be great if we could continue to create deflationary pressure on the system and have URI and a worker proposal system in some fashion. Like, why not both? You know, let's aim for the moon. But the worker proposal it seems like a really hard system to get right. But, you know, we see those working for Dash, and we see those working for BitShares and probably some other projects too. So it can happen, but EOS is, you know, orders of magnitude higher, I think, than in the target that those worker proposal systems represent. So it's hard to say.
Yeah, and to clarify a little bit there for listeners, there's a discussion over where URI funds would come from. So there's the possibility that URI funds come from the inflation that's already built in. So EOS has 5% inflation, 1% going to the block producers, 4% right now is being talked about going to worker proposal funds. That 4% also is now being talked about possibly going into the URI system. So that inflation is, like you said, equal to all token holders. The other place that money can come, or excuse me, that EOS can come from is from an actual tax on individual wallets. So say you hold 100 EOS, then 5% 5 EOS per year would come out of your wallet and go into the URI distribution. Now, if you only held 100 EOS, then you would get far more than that 5% back over the course of a year through URI. So those are the two places, basically a wealth tax or from inflation. And they are essentially the same thing, which Rob makes the point. And also Rob brought up Steemit. I tend towards the inflation model, even though it's the same thing. It is far more palatable because it's there's not the friction of someone having to take money out of their own wallet or seeing money leave their own wallet. Whereas, and that's been such an interesting concept, seeing with Steemit how fluid the system works, and how I'm not afraid to upvote someone at 100% 10 times a day. I'm inflating the system. I'm losing some of personal value possibly by doing that, but since I don't actually see it leave my wallet, it makes more sense to us viscerally. So for that reason, I think that URI is so much more palatable as inflation as opposed to a tax. And so that's my general take. And the specific difference there would be on a tax, it's equally distributed over everyone, 5%. Well, I guess does that turn out to be exactly the same? 5% of a wall? I don't know. Someone else can take it from there.
Some of the UBI proposals I've read about from like nation states do tax the wealthy more and redistribute that to everyone else. So it seems a little bit more, everyone is subject to the same pressures in the URI case, the inflation case, whereas depending on which UBI implementation you're studying or looking at the nation state level, I think those tend to tax the wealthy more, and it kind of like scales. So yeah, I think the URI, definitely appeals more to libertarian mindsets and people that, subscribe to those sorts of values. And yeah, loss aversion is a huge thing to think about when we're making interfaces. I mean, just look at flagging on Steam or Steemit, that, people think they already made the money that they're seeing their pending post is worth. And then when it comes along, gets flagged, like causes a lot of drama because people feel attacked and stuff because they already booked that whatever their post was worth. Mentally they booked it like, oh, I'm getting paid that much. And then, it comes down, they come back later and it's worth half because some whale flagged them or whatever. And they, some people freaked out about that. So yeah, definitely it's better to use inflation just from a psychological perspective, I think, because it doesn't feel like someone's reaching into your pocket at that point.
I think also as a side note on EOS specifically, right now, as far as I'm aware, I don't think there's any way to sort of take tokens out of someone's wallet using the code without resorting to the ECAS system and all that and getting the block producers to do that.
BP supermajority.
Yeah, if you were to want to actually implement like a wealth tax on EOS, you basically need to change the core code to do that. Whereas we already have inflation. If we're trying to use an inflationary mechanism, it's already there. We just need to redirect it towards a smart contract that distributes it to uniquely identified individuals.
Yeah, and that would be super hacky and messy to do it with the current tools. As you said, you definitely would need a protocol upgrade because with the current tools, we'd essentially have to automate the BPs reaching into every single account's pockets collectively. And, who wants to, I don't want to campaign on that.
No one's going to like
platform.
That.
Yeah, like we're not.
We'd break the internet.
The token holders would not approve VPs that supported that. So Yeah, it just wouldn't work, I don't think.
Well, that's a really valid point, and now I totally agree with you guys. I hadn't thought of that, and so now when I see that come up in discussions about where it should come from, I mean that's kind of a null point at this at this juncture. So yeah, I can't even imagine what Reddit would look like if EOS started pulling money out of everyone's account on a daily basis. That'd be fun.
Work. Pulling it out and putting it back in other people's pockets.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, the governed nature of EOS already gets it so much flack because there's a large demographic of people in this industry that totally dismiss it and don't even consider it decentralized at all because of the governance features. Now, granted, they're misunderstood, I think, and they also haven't done the due diligence to do proper research. But just that we are already dealing with a lot of gridding in and people sort of not even willing to look at it, which I think is going to be to their own, missed opportunity, essentially. But it's interesting. Like, I think it will take a little while for people to realize you can have a governed blockchain and it can still be decentralized. And that's how I feel EOS actually is today.
Yeah, I like it's a grand experiment. And I think that there is, for me, I see a middle ground in between code is law and intent of code is law, where EOS kind of lies. And a lot of the maximalist, code is law is kind of the only way to go, and with no possibility of governance. But as humans, I believe we do have the capacity to take a step up mentally, find a creative way to govern ourselves. I mean, we still have the best computing power in the world in our minds. And once we harness that in a more intellectual way, I think that there's a possibility of something better than code is law being out there. So yeah, that's my brief take. Oh, and you brought something up, just about Reddit and things like that. One of the questions I ask, because I am a huge ETH fan. I was a huge ETH fan. I came from ETH and that realm. And a question that I pose to people is, especially ETH developers who say, EOS is complete garbage, this and that. I say, well, I've met a lot of ETH developers who switched over and who are now EOS developers. Like, how have you met any and who are huge ETH fans and they're now huge EOS fans? Have you met anyone that was a huge EOS fan and is a big EOS developer who switched to ETH? It seems to be a one-way street. So
yeah, I definitely haven't.
Yeah, so that just says something about the open-mindedness. There are people who've switched one direction, but there aren't necessarily people who have. Yeah. So anyway, I
will say I do see a use case for Ethereum outside of EOS in that it is immutable. You can't change what the code is in a contract, which is useful for certain applications, like maybe for company governance, if you wanted to run a DAC, but not necessarily a decentralized application, then I see a real use case for Ethereum, but Ethereum's just basically unworkable for any decentralized application that doesn't involve money.
Correct. Yeah. And I'm a fan of both. Like you, I say that there's a use case for both. And I think that a lot of EOS people have maybe even come from ETH and they say, both of these have some sort of, I agree with you on that. ETH is fantastic, So.
I think definitely done a considerable amount to move the industry forward. Technology-wise, I've never been an ETH believer, but I crossed paths with Dan early, so I learned a lot of his arguments against UTXO-based blockchain architectures, and along the way, I was basically convinced, this stuff won't age well.
Yeah.
But all having said that, I mean, the mainstream effect that ETH has created with, the explosive interest in our industry because of all the new projects and all the new opportunities and the ICOs and this and that and the crypto kitties and stuff. You know, like a lot more people have their eyes on Ethereum than EOS. They just don't know. So ETH, regardless, is going to be a heavyweight in this industry. It's not going anywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me bring us to back to URI here a little bit. And so we've explained what URI is, and I hope that we did a decent job so people have a decent understanding. Now let's talk a little bit about some of the kind of theory behind it a little. Let me go to the Medium article here by Dan and just read a short sentence. It's possible to support a universal inheritance supported by a modest wealth tax while being logically consistent, economically sound, libertarian. In fact, it may be the only logically consistent theory of property rights that could be broadly accepted by the masses while automatically correcting for past and injustices. So I think that is a big one for people who are from a libertarian mindset, who a lot of people are, who are from maybe a competitive or a free market mindset, which a lot of people are. This is, if you're listening and you're someone who has these feelings, this doesn't necessarily go against them. And I think that's where a lot of the real quick pushback on URI comes from, is that people think it's some sort of, we want to create some sort of global welfare state. But it's much more nuanced than that, and it's building incentives that actually last long term, where I think that you mentioned earlier, when you look at nations who have proposed universal basic income, which is a whole different thing, it's some sort of sliding scale where they are trying to redistribute wealth to the poor people. And the reason that economically for libertarians doesn't make sense is because it changes the incentives, and it's kind of, it's taking the approach as what is needed. Well, these poor people need this much money to be okay. Let's take it from these rich people and give it to these. And this, what is needed, is not coming from what's sustainable. So what's already available. And so this is a whole new theory. And that's why it's called universal resource inheritance, because it's taking not what's needed, but what's already available, what's been given to us out of thin air every day. That's our baseline. That's where the 5% comes from. And that 5% can be consistently, or it can be maintained over time. So it's an influx into the economy, but without necessarily taking too much, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I love that's a great way to put it. And I love the thought of, if you don't use it, you lose it. Like, make your capital do something. If you have it, don't just sit on it like a dragon on treasure, but like go out there and make it productive. And so it creates this new incentive for everyone to make their capital more productive, which alone could drive a lot of economic efficiency. Like, fix up that house and rent it. Don't just let it sit there and camp on the property values. You're being diluted now, so that's, I really like that. It feels like it just indirectly creates an incentive for people to use their capital more strategically. And yeah, 5% is modest. I'm sure if you're in this industry, you've seen larger gains. So, yeah.
I think also a really interesting part of this whole URI proposal is that it really kind of allows the whole arbitration process in EOS to work. So right now we have this arbitration process which can potentially, do privileged transactions, but there is no built-in disincentive. If someone comes in with, one EOS and then does a bunch of shady stuff, you only have one EOS to take away. But with a universal resource inheritance, if they have a bunch of future money in a 1-year bond, which is what the sort of proposed idea is, then you have something to levy arbitration against. So right now there is no kind of savings account that you can look at and be like, you've done something wrong. Now we're going to disincentivize that bad behavior. But with that URI, we actually have something to kind of levy against, and it's not taking coins directly from someone's wallet. Again, it's just sort of, oh, if you don't follow our rules, then you can't get your basic resource inheritance.
Yeah, it's like garnishing wages.
Yeah.
It's not coming from you. It's being taken from you before you get the grant. But that's because you're in the timeout corner because you did something against the rules of the self-governed community. That's a really good point. I hadn't even considered that.
The rules are essentially, you can be part of this community, get all of the benefits that come with it if you follow these rules. But if you don't follow these rules, you agreed that if you don't follow these rules, we get to take away these benefits that we've been giving to you. That's sort of like how the U.S. federal government gets everyone to set their drinking age at 21, is that they say, if you don't, then you don't get highway money. And thus
I never knew about that. That's interesting.
I'm pretty sure that's
basically
the
like you got to jump this high.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that either. That's a really good point, Andrew. Thank you. I hadn't read that anywhere either, but yeah, that's building more incentives into the system. I mean, that's something that you see a lot of blockchains have problem with. I mean, Steemit's a good example where new users have zero incentive to act right. So if I'm coming onto Steemit and I have one Steem and, there's people with 1 million Steem, what I'm going to do is create, 1,000 bots and just try to spam the system and work it and manipulate it however I can to grow my account because I have nothing to lose. And if that, if I came into Steemit with one and I started doing that and I was going to actually lose some sort of future gains that were universally coming to me, then I would be acting right. So that's that. You definitely see how that incentive will change the blockchain. And of course, these things are based on unique identities, which hopefully Dan comes out with the details of soon. That's one of the things I'm most excited to hear about. I
hope that's the announcement.
Yeah, I hope so too. That'll be such a game changer. I mean, the amount of opportunity that opens up for just dApp builders, even this tool of being able to uniquely identify one person, one account is just, it's going to change the game. So I can't wait.
Yeah, we can move the city election to EOS.
Mm-hmm. There you go. Exactly. You'd made a point just previously. You said that, which I think is a really valid point to help people understand how URI works. But this, from a libertarian standpoint, URI doesn't kill competition. You can still get ahead by being productive. You can still get massively ahead by being productive. But to stay ahead for generations, you need to stay productive. So that's where the 5% number comes from, is that if you were to say you had 1,000 EOS, you were really productive, you had 1,000 EOS, or you had 10,000 EOS, 100,000 EOS. Now that 5% inflation, or URI, over the course of a lifetime, basically over 100 years, is going to turn into nothing. And so it's your job to either say, okay, I'm willing to let that turn into nothing over the course of my lifetime, or I'm going to stay productive and I'm going to keep that number up and I'm going to actually pass some inheritance on, or I'm going to, I'm going to take that money and I'm going to make that money productive and make it work for me to outpace that 5% inflation and keep it there. So that's where that 5% comes from. But the theory behind it is you can still get ahead by being productive, but you need to remain productive to stay ahead. You can't just turn your money into a gold bars, bury it in your yard and expect it to be there at the end of your lifetime.
Yeah, I think that's mostly True, but the first generation to have the URIs, it's going to be a little different because there's such a huge delta between the market potential for something like EOS and what its value is today. Like we may be the lucky ones where we could actually go through that whole generation not being productive and still make a ton of money. Because I think the assumption when we say that the 5% is going to devalue to zero over 100 years is that the overall worth of the economy stays steady, like, stagnates at the same value. But if something like EOS comes along and the whole economy gets more valuable, so it's kind of interesting. Like, I think in the long run, the equilibrium state is exactly what you described, but because we're at the very beginning, we still have like this interesting position where that might not be the case for us, I don't know.
I think that's actually a really valid point. And also the point kind of becomes that maybe that equilibrium state is maybe we don't reach that equilibrium state perpetually with the incentive set correctly. And that's kind of was Dan's Virginia Tech talk when he talks about a government without taxes. This idea that this 5% inflation or this 5% basically wealth tax, the government uses it to do productive things in society, and it's their job to basically grow the productivity of a society by more than 5%. They've got to outpace that 5%. And so it's kind of this perpetual productivity machine where we're in charge of making sure that we always are more productive than that 5% tax. As a global community, maybe we don't hit that plateau that you're talking about. So,
yeah, it's a good point. While you were explaining, I had thought about how the way that we're actually dividing the ownership of EOS Detroit functions very similar to something like URI. So we're actually using something called the slicing pie method, and it's a model where you actually quantify contributions. So time and cash spent are the biggest examples, but it can also be other capital like equipment. It can be commissions for finder's fees for investors or like in a sales type gig. So there's different ways you can allocate slices. So as the person who started EOS Detroit, the progenitor, the creator, I've got co-founders too, but it was my idea. I have the most slices. I've done the most work. But if I stop working today and the rest of my team continues to work, my share of the company will decrease over time because I'm not being productive anymore. So I get diluted. My equity gets diluted if other people on the team are more productive than me or working more hours, putting in more cash. So it has that same incentive set of, well, if you want to maintain a steady amount of ownership, you have to continue to produce. I can't just be, I launched it, I assigned myself 40% up front, and now you all build value for me, which is how a lot of companies work. I have to continue to show up. And so I just realized like, oh, hey, the URI model is very similar to slicing pie. And we're doing that internally. And we've also created a management app so we can do it for the Telos launch group founders bounty as well. So I'm working on mapping that into an EOS app. So that's where we're going with it. But it's kind of a interesting analogy. It works really well. Like, it's a really good incentive model.
Yeah, I think the key to any system that really works is having an incentive structure that keeps it working continuously, that doesn't just reward someone like that and then call it a day. They have to continue providing value. They have to continue building and making the value of the entire whatever group, make that value go up, or else they're not going to get more ownership or rewards or anything like that. It's a good way of doing it.
Thanks. Yeah, totally.
To see it in action, kind of in the startup world, which essentially is Detroit, functions like some sort like a startup.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, to see it in action is a great case study for this theory of having to stay productive. I mean,
yeah. So our long-term, well, not that long. We'll get to it eventually. We want to provide a continuously updating page for the token holders so they can see the ownership of the company in real time and how it's shifting over time. So, we're a radically transparent block producer. We're trying to really not just follow the standard startup procedures, but, think from fundamentals. How do we want our company to function, and how can we really dog food the ethos of, a decentralized world and decentralized autonomous communities, which, ideally we would be, but regulation makes that difficult here in the States. So we're not trying to be that much of a guinea pig yet.
Yeah, absolutely. So what, let's briefly talk about, and maybe we kind of hit on them, but when I first posted the first URI talk, I got a lot of really quick pushback that, people aren't interested in communism. People aren't interested in redistribution of wealth. What would be your brief message to people who maybe have that libertarian mindset, or they're, Ayn Rand fans? What would be like a message to them?
Communism relies on state force. It relies on a state, right? We're not doing this experiment with a state. So immediately, I think calling it communism is sort of missing the point, because it's all voluntary and it's all built around nonviolent principles. And we don't have a state enforcing and monitoring the system, which becomes hugely inefficient. So we have software mediating that instead. So yeah, our blockchain's, gonna become, the successor to states. I don't know. I kind of hope so. But, I guess it's hard for me to, really debate those things, because I try not to corner myself in an ideology. So, I have anarchist tendencies. I don't want to see a state. I don't want to live under a state, but I do. And pragmatically, I want to make the world a better place while I'm here. So some things you just have to, I don't know. I think it's good to stay flexible would be my thing. Like, maybe the best system is actually cherry picking ideas and riffing off them, like Dan has with URI, and synthesizing some hybrid that the world's never seen before, instead of going pure into one ideological vertical. So that's kind of how I approach things. What's the best tool for the job? Not, can I map my ideology into the world I want to see?
For me, the problem I see with so there's like sort of two big issues with communism. One of them is that it's imposed violently by the state. The other one is that it does not incorporate the efficiency of markets. And instead, they ask people to vote on what they want. And it's just, I've never heard a concrete, workable proposal for how you're supposed to decide what to make in a communist society. This is not that. This is giving, essentially, if you consider capitalism to be people voting with their money on what they want, then this is essentially giving a minimum number of votes to people so that they can actually decide what they want. And we can get a real idea of what the most desirable allocation of funds is between different places. And right now, we basically have whatever rich people think is most desirable, because they're the ones who have the voting power. But this sort of gives us the opportunity, gives all people the opportunity to decide what they want to see in the world, just through the use of basic capitalist or trade. I don't know what you want to call it, but just through the well understood mechanisms of economics, essentially.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that it brings up this fundamental misconception that a lot of our current system seems to be going off of. So it's this thought that this 1% of people, because they have accumulated this wealth, somehow have a better understanding of the world or where it should be going. They're smart, so that's why they got all this money, and so they should be making the decisions. And that's kind of that's why longer term, bigger picture, that actually URI, it doesn't disincentivize competition, but it slowly churns this wealth in a real slow and unnoticeable manner, and in a way that actually brings new thoughts and new people into these places where they can make decisions. It's not just this inherited right to make decisions. My grandpa was helped build the railroads, and so now I sit on the board of this bank and tell everyone what to do. That's kind of the thought that somehow the amount of wealth or the high wealth people have a much higher intelligence than the normal people is kind of for me a fundamental misconception. And so hopefully things like URI kind of address that. Generationally, each generation proves themselves. So the other kind of idea that pops into my mind is this idea of the negotiation between generations. So the question that if you were going to be just randomly assigned a time in history and a random social class, how would you want the system to be set up? Would you want it to be set up that you were going to be, probably most likely not on the good end of that stick, let's just say, or would you like it to be set up where you have this universal resource inheritance, you have this kind of place to start from and this opportunity to slowly, with your productivity, work yourself up? So anyway, those are just some general thoughts, but there's so much to talk about with URI.
Yeah, definitely. I'm going to have to send you guys some of our shirts. We just actually did a new run. I got to go pick them up after this. And they've got some Dan quotes. And one of them was, economic efficiency is not a value neutral goal, which was in, the line of thought along URI. And I think that's really a short, pithy way to get to the heart of what you were just saying about, do the people who have more money currently because of their position in the world, because of who their parents were or their grandparents, necessarily are they the best ones to allocate the capital? And I think it's a really interesting conversation starter. So definitely hit me up with your addresses after this, and I'll send you a couple. But yeah, I think to that point, if these people are so intelligent that have tons of wealth, like the 1% or whatever, why is the world so perverse? We could do better, I think. And bringing in new blood and more people and more ideas and more cognitive diversity, I think, is a stronger path than assuming that the people on top are going to be benevolent.
Yeah, absolutely. It's it almost makes us more anti-fragile to kind of go off of Nassim Taleb's theory of these much less points of failure, than a lot of decisions being made one place, decisions made by thousands of unique ideas and interesting angles, I think is a great way to do anything.
The wisdom of the crowd.
The wisdom of the crowd. Yeah.
Well, and that goes off of what Andrew said about market efficiency. If we have more and more people using real free markets, we're going to have more information to sort through, to derive insights from, and that could be really beneficial to elevate everyone in the world of first-class economic avatars, as opposed to the kind of perverted market infrastructure we have today, where there's so many layers of the onions and everyday people can't even get close to it. Accredited investor status is the best example that I can come up with right off the bat. Like, I'm just not smart enough or cool enough to be able to invest in something that, I see as a sound value just because I don't have enough money. I just don't think it's the right way to do things.
It's really a way for the rich to get the government to help ensure that they are the only ones who remain rich, essentially. I mean, if you have to have a certain amount of wealth in order to invest in the thing that's going to give you the most bang for your buck in terms of returns, then the people who don't have enough capital to be engaged in that are not going to reap any of the rewards.
Yep, it's definitely some entrenchment going on there, it feels.
Yeah. Am I right that say URI was to be voted into the EOS ecosystem, and we used it for a year, and there were some sort of perverse outcomes that we didn't expect? What do you think the probability of us getting rid of URI once it's been implemented is?
I think what we would see is incrementally trying to fix gameable like holes or exploits. And then if we got to the point where it just seemed entirely unworkable, like there's a fundamental design problem, and it was devaluing the system, I think we would see the token holders move to referendum quickly. But yeah, in general, I think we'd see an incremental attempt to fix the problem before we did a repeal. And then if it was realized like, oh, we backed ourselves into a corner, better just roll it all back, then that would cause a lot of panics and probably cause price volatility, and that might move token holders to do stuff, whether that's sell or vote. So that would be my assumption.
Yeah, I think that's pretty, I mean, just given how the governance of EOS works, I think that's a pretty accurate assessment. I have heard one big sort of, I've heard it argued before, just maybe not in terms of this specific proposal, but just in terms of various welfare proposals, is that once you start giving people that URI or their basic income, whichever one it is, they will not want to see it voted out because it benefits them directly. And I don't think that's necessarily the case for EOS, because token holders with more tokens are the ones most affected by the URI proposal, but also they have the most say in terms of which direction it goes in. So while usually in a completely democratic system, you for sure expect to see that once you implement something like a URI, you're not going to be able to remove it. I think having the large token holders with more of a say than the small token holders essentially somewhat balances that out. I'm not sure, math-wise how equal it is, but it is for sure, it would be easier to repeal in this system than it would be in, say, if we did it in the United States in a national level or something like that.
Yeah, definitely. I feel you there. And intuitively, I think I agree. And there's always the final lever of, well, we just can't agree. We're going to go over and start our own colony over here, and then, we've got EOS mainnet too. So, if it really did come down to a hugely contentious issue, then there's always the recourse of launching a chain that is configured without URI. So, yeah, I mean, that's the revolution. We want to try to come to consensus before we get there. Thankfully, EOS gives us the tools to do so.
Yeah,
but
we won't have to go to EOS Cache.
Yeah, exactly.
So do you guys have any kind of hot topics or things on URI that you feel like we glossed over during the course of the talk? Do you guys have anything to kind of add to cap on here?
I think one really important thing to think about is the identity solution, because I've been thinking about universal basic income, specifically cryptocurrency UBI, or that basic idea, URI, same idea, essentially, for a while. And one of the big sticking points is making sure you have individual users. And I don't know what the solution is yet, but Dan Limmer seems pretty confident that he's come up with a simple and really usable solution. I'm sort of just curious what you guys think it might be, if you have any ideas.
Offhand, I have no idea what Dan has cooked up, other than I believe he's alluded to the fact that it's cryptographically verifiable. So that's one of the things I continue to see him mentioning. And I don't believe it relies on nation states, which is an important factor. So I have no idea. I'm really excited to see the implementation that they're going towards. And in general, I think a lot of people that are early adopters to crypto are kind of adverse. Maybe not as much more recently, because a lot of people are willing to KYC to do ICO stuff. But I think there's a large sort of number of people that are frightened by identity on chain. And, is this the launch of a digital surveillance state? And in my opinion, it's going to be so crucial how the identity system is implemented, whether or not, we're moving in a dystopian trajectory or not. But in general, I think accountability and transparency are the largest boons of the technology. So, if you don't want it to be leaked, then don't digitize it. But yeah, I think it'll be extremely interesting to see what the solution is. I really don't know.
Yeah.
Sorry, go for it.
Oh, I've just seen in the chat that it's going to include a photo, and that it's going to be some sort of continuous proof of life. So, it's all fairly cryptic at this point for me.
My wild guess based on that would be like everyone's got to take a selfie at 10 o'clock, between 10 o'clock and 10:01 p.m. Universal Standard Time, and then just all at once everyone's got to take a photo, so that you can't do it with two different accounts, because you have to do it at a particular point in time. That's just a wild guess, so I don't know.
That's a pretty simple idea, isn't it, to have it at a certain time, to make sure that you can't have two accounts. That's interesting. Huh. Cool.
Yeah. Only time will tell, though.
Yeah, and you know the interesting thing about the unique accounts is that there will be people who try to create fake identities, but with something like URI, the incentives are there that they're going to possibly be blacklisted, or they have something to lose by attempting this. So maybe I have an identity and I try to create a fake identity, but I'm putting at risk my kind of, I'm killing the goose that lays the golden eggs type of thing. So that comes back to this URI incentives, which is, it just goes together really nicely. Yeah. Did either you guys have anything else you feel like we kind of skipped over too quick, or any parts of URI that we didn't dig into enough?
I think we did a pretty comprehensive job. I can't think of any points I really wanted to make that we hadn't covered myself.
Cool.
I do like the quote from Dan, "I'm lending earth to people."
Mm-hmm.
I almost put that on a shirt, but I didn't.
Yeah, that is cool. Well, yeah, I've got the same shirt that you have. You gave it to me at the in San Francisco during the mainnet launch of EOS, a kind of monumental time. So, killer shirt, man. They're really comfortable and stuff. You have them for sale online somewhere too, or how's that work?
We're discussing putting up a crypto swag store just for our merch, because we have a really killer designer in-house,
Cool.
Dylan Tull. This one is actually designed by Steve Floyd from EOS Tribe. He did designs for every city, and put a picture from the city inside each of the chestahedrons. So shout out to Steve.
Cool.
But yeah, I mean, it's something we want to do, because we know we're actually sitting on 20 other designs that are really cool, but we could only print 4 or 5. So we're exploring it right now, though. You have to come find me.
Yeah.
And,
okay.
If you really, really want one, find me, and you probably can get one.
Cool. Yeah, you guys are everywhere though. EOS Detroit, so you guys all over the place. So I've been lucky enough to find you. I got a killer hat from you guys too. I really like. So
yeah, one of these bad boys.
Yep, that's the one. That's killer with the patch.
Those are limited edition.
Okay, good.
We're not doing another run of that.
I'm gonna keep mine clean then. That thing's awesome. What type of kind of final thoughts do you guys have? You can go ahead, and then after that we'll do a little you can tell some links for EOS Detroit. But yeah, go ahead and give us some final thoughts, Rob.
Sure. Well, vote for EOS IO Detroit.
There you go.
Yeah, and I would just say to the audience, be intellectually honest, and open your mind in a way that allows your previous notions to be challenged. So, something that smells like UBI, which is something you may have been completely against before, may actually be capable of being implemented soundly in a way that's compatible with your ideals. So, just keep an open mind.
Cool. And you got some final thoughts for us there, Andrew?
I really want to highlight how much potential giving everybody a universal resource inheritance with a emphasis on the resource is, because in EOS, if you have a little bit of EOS, you can publish a smart contract to the blockchain with whatever your personal economic vision for your industry is, and start an entire movement just with a little bit of EOS. And you can't do that until you enter the ecosystem, but once you have that EOS, you can enter the ecosystem. The opportunity that it opens up to your average person is just huge. And then with that, the opportunity that it gives to EOS token holders for interacting with all of these new users is also huge. So just from a pure price of the token standpoint, I see that as one of the most important things to remember. It's just for me.
Yeah, that's a killer concept right there, is that by making giving a little bit of EOS to everyone, this resource of bandwidth, and a chance to build something on the EOS blockchain becomes available globally. It's no longer someone's got to go make a little bit of money and buy a little bit of EOS and have this little bit of start to launch a smart contract. It's available to the people, and that's unlocking a massive resource of intellectual power all over the globe. So that's a great point. And my final thought is, I just think that this is such a nuanced argument. I would encourage people to take the time to understand it deeply, because it's not UBI. It's not some sort of welfare state. It's not it's not what people on Reddit bash it as. It is a new concept that has its own fundamentals, its own incentives, and they're really compelling. For me, the more I dig into it, the more I go, wow, I, for the majority of my life, have had a kind of gut reaction against universal basic income. And it's just been, no, I'm not, that's not my thing. So I understand when people say, I don't want to hear about it. But my message would be, this is fundamentally different. This is something new, and check it out. It's nuanced. So keep your mind open, as Rob said. And we're in a wonderful time and place in history, and we're all slowly trying to change things for the better. So I'm proud to be a part of it. And I really appreciate you guys coming in here and chatting with me for over an hour here. It's been killer, man. I really liked it.
Yeah, this has been a great conversation. Thanks for inviting us on, Brandon. It's been super fun.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. I've been watching your videos and listening to your podcasts and stuff. It's exciting to be brought into the community and given a chance to voice my opinion. So appreciate
absolutely, man. Great thoughts today. Great thoughts.
Every voice matters.
Yeah, that's where we're at. So
I've got some links.
Some links, yes, that's what I was going to say. EOS Detroit, where's the best place for people to find you? And what's kind of your call to action to the EOS community out there?
I'm just going to share my screen to make it easy. So you guys can have a sneak peek at something I just quickly threw up today. We're actually making an EOS community calendar that will have links to global live streams, conferences. We can see the London events. You can also see all the EOS Alliance events on here.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to populate this and actually open it up to the community. You can see some future events like the SF Hackathon and the Oslo BP Summit. So we're looking to fill this out. So if you have any events open to the global community or online events that you'd like to post, we'll be making that available at eosdetroit.io/calendar. We are also on Twitter. So you can follow us on Twitter at EOSIO Detroit, same name as our BP. We are also on YouTube, and we actually live stream a lot of the calls within the EOS community, whether it's block producers, ECAF, EOS Alliance, any work group. If you want a work group streamed, we're happy to stream it to our YouTube channel. And so you can actually see, we've got a few different playlists for those different purposes. And we do the Telos contributor calls, EOS Alliance, BP calls. So we're really all about transparency, and we want to make sure the people that are supporting EOS, but not necessarily on the inside as like a BP or part of a BP team, can also tune into all of the discussions happening. And we also live stream all of our guest speakers and events here as well. So you can find us at eosdetroit.io. You can find us Twitter, YouTube. We're on most of the social channels, Facebook, Medium. And yeah, I mean, we're also in Telegram. So I know that's where most people like to hang out on as far as in the crypto scene. So you can find us on Telegram and come ask us questions directly. And, you might be able to get a shirt if you find me here. So that's all I got.
There you go. Well, I will share your EOS Detroit links. The community calendar is a killer idea. There's so much going on with EOS. To have a calendar that shows it all is going to be a great resource. So thanks for doing that.
Yeah, we've actually set that up in a manner that it can be integrated on any website as well. So we want to make this a de facto place for us to repo everything going on, because it's already really hard to keep all the information sorted in like a chaotic, decentralized ecosystem like EOS. So we want to wrangle that. And to that effect, we do have a couple partners that will be integrating the calendar, and, you know, we're open to anyone who wants to throw it on their site. So yeah, and in the future, you know, community members will also be able to just submit events to the calendar, and then we'll just have a light admin process to keep it uncluttered. So yeah, that's where we're going with it. We want to really help to build up the community more, because we've got so much momentum. We just got to keep this going.
Yeah, and I love the transparency with your YouTube channel, doing those block producer calls and in the work groups and whatever, you know, the meetings that are going on. That's great. So I'll put a link to your calendar, your YouTube channel, so people can see what's being talked about in meetings, your Twitter, your Telegram. I'll put links in the show notes, so you guys can find EOS Detroit there. Yeah, absolutely. And then you can find me on Twitter and YouTube, Steemit, and the EOS Podcast. That's kind of where a lot of this is going, is the EOS Podcast. So download it on whatever podcasting app you have, and let's get the information out there to the EOS people. Andrew, any closing thoughts for us there, bud?
Not really, nothing to plug except for vote for EOS Detroit and listen to that EOS podcast, because I've done both of them and I'm a fan of both.
All right, cool. And Andrew's a fantastic musician, so maybe we'll go look him up online somewhere too. So we got it all going on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, cheers,
awesome.
Cheers, my EOS friends, my crypto friends, and we'll see you next time at the EOS Podcast.
The money is not the prime asset in life. Time is, and your time is just